Welcome to this video article where I'm going to do a 5-step hero's journey story analysis, or a minimum viable hero's journey analysis of Shirley Jackson's great story, The Lottery. If you've not read The Lottery, you can get it. There are various collections of Shirley Jackson's available reasonably cheaply on Kindle, so you can get it pretty cheaply. I took a screen grab of this picture from a book on Amazon, and I love the cover. If you've not read the story, I won't explain the significance. If you have, you'll understand. But I thought that was a fabulous cover for this collection with The Lottery as its centerpiece. So, if you've not seen any of my 5-step minimum viable hero's journey videos, I'll quickly overview those 5 steps. They are the implied ordinary world, the efficient call to adventure, the distinct threshold crossing, a death and rebirth ordeal or a resurrection, and then a reward or return with the elixir. Now, there are videos. There's 2 videos I've done which you can find on my channel going into the minimum viable hero's journey in more detail, and this is the 4th story analysis video article I've done using this framework, and I'm going to be doing several more, and I'm trying to pick very different stories so that you can see how it maps out for different stories. Now, The Lottery, I'm going to give a quick story overview, so if you haven't read this, please stop the video and go and grab yourself a copy, because this is one of those stories where the spoiler of what happens at the end will diminish your enjoyment of the story, because this is a revelation story and the revelation is shocking. And when you've read it, if you go back and then reread the story and see how it's set up, it's a masterful piece of writing, really worth looking at. It's definitely, I think you can get one of the collection books for like $5 or $6 on Kindle. That's obviously Amazon US. If you're in a different territory, it'll be different currency. It's pretty cheap. I think it's worth it just for this one story. If you read nothing else, read this one story. It's a writing masterclass in and of itself. I don't have time in this video article to go through all the little nuances, but you can certainly take the story apart for yourself and find those nuances. Anyway, the story overview is: a village gathers the end of June in summer for their annual village lottery. The lottery is drawn from an old black box, and it's a tradition that goes back possibly hundreds of years. Tessie's family, she is part of the Hutchison family, draw the marked paper in the first round. Then there's a second round, and Tessie draws the black dot, which is the marked paper in the second round, and she is the inverted commas winner, and her reward is the villagers stone Tessie and reveal the true purpose of the lottery. It's a ritual sacrifice. So that's the story overview. So Tessie obviously isn't a traditional hero. She's very much a tragic hero. Let's look at the steps of the minimum viable hero's journey, the 5-step hero's journey. First step is the implied ordinary world. So Tessie is a typical community member. She's taking part in her village's annual lottery. She even turns up late and makes jokes about being late, that she was doing the washing up and looked out for the children and no one was there. It's portrayed as a very ordinary event in that children are playing, adults are talking about everyday things like planting, stuff like that, obviously giving a sense of what the village is about. But note, especially if you're rereading the story after this analysis, that at the start of the story, some of the kids, and it's portrayed as play, but it has significance later when the revelation is made. Some of the kids have already stuffed their pockets with stones, and some of the other ones then build a mound of stones, which they guard from other children to stop them taking them. Efficient call to adventure. Her family's name, Tessie's family's name, the Hutchinsons, are drawn from the first round of the lottery. I think there were something like 77 or 78 family names in the draw, so 1 in 78 chance. Tessie protests. She says it wasn't fair that her husband wasn't given enough time to choose the paper he wanted to. She wants to refuse the call. So we can already see this is, and one of the things about the hero's journey is it's not a blueprint, it's a set of guidelines. And there's a video where Chris Vogler's being interviewed, and he says that the audience is so familiar now with the conventions of the hero's journey that what you can actually do is use them to set up things that subvert those expectations. And the example he uses, and if you've never watched the TV show Game of Thrones, then please skip forward 15 seconds. But the example he uses in season 1 is when Ned Stark is beheaded in season 1 of Game of Thrones. And when I watched that, I remember I was watching it on my laptop with DVDs. So it must have been one of my old laptops, because the DVD was actually in the side of the laptop, and they don't ship laptops with DVD or CD drives anymore. And I remember physically thinking, that can't be right. Ned can't have been beheaded. Somehow he must have done something that I've missed, and it was someone else who was beheaded. And I rewound and rewatched the sequence leading up to the beheading several times before I realised, wow, they just cut Ned's head off. Fuck me, because I totally didn't expect it. And that's a great example of subverting the expectations of the hero's journey. And if you've got the time, get season 1 of Game of Thrones and watch the first 7 or 8 episodes and see how Ned is set up. I mean, for me, it was even worse because I bought a box set of the first 3 seasons, which was when I started watching it. And one of the pictures on the cover of the box set was Ned sat on the throne with a sword. And he's just set up as the perfect character who's the hero. And then they subvert expectations and he gets his head cut off. So anyway, back to the lottery. Tessie protests. She wants to refuse the call. But we're now approaching a distinct threshold crossing. And Tessie is breaking from community consensus by protesting that things weren't fair, which is a line of dialogue that she uses. I've got my dialogue marks on different lines. She tries, against the rules, to draw her married daughter and her son-in-law into the second round, but the chap who's conducting the lottery and the draws tells her that that's not the rules. Everything's very patriarchal. Can't speak this morning. Patriarchal, and still not said it right. And you have to remember the story was written in 1948. So from that perspective, it's very much a story of its time. Feminism was still very much in the future. And the heads of the male heads of the house are the ones who draw the tickets from the lottery box. And there's a couple of paragraphs about someone who's a lady whose husband is dead and her son is not old enough to draw it, so she draws it. So there's 2 or 3 paragraphs. So and that's part of Jackson setting up the society, and I'll talk about why that's important towards the end of the video. But Tessie's trying to get more people into the draw to make her odds of not being the one who draws the marked lottery ticket slightly better. But as I said, the chap who's drawing the lottery says that's against the rules. And she moves, because of her protestations, she moves from community member to isolated outsider. And if you read this section of the story, you see that her husband is much more accepting of what it means that they have to be drawn in. They have to all be drawn. There's her husband, Tessie, and their 3 children, who all have to be drawn. And he's much more accepting of this ritual than she is at this point, because for her it's suddenly become very real that either her or one of her family are going to draw the marked black spot with all that entails. 4th step is the death and rebirth ordeal. Tessie draws the paper with the black spot, and so she's selected as the winner, in inverted commas, and her old identity as an accepted community member literally dies when she draws that, and marks her as an outsider, and her physical death will follow shortly. There's a line when they're talking about whether they should still do the lottery, and there's another village nearby that have dropped it, and one of the old timers in the village says that at least in the village they still use stones, as is traditional, and that's before we understand what the stones are for. And again, it's another subtle line of dialogue which, when you reread the story, has a lot of weight that you maybe don't fully grasp when you first read the story. Reward return with the elixir. The annual ritual is fulfilled through Tessie's sacrificial death. The irony is her death is the community's reward for preserving their ritual. So I said she was a tragic hero. So at the death and rebirth stage, she falls at that stage, and obviously she doesn't get rebirth, but the community get their rebirth because they've preserved the ritual. There's also a line in the story that hints at kind of fertility stroke sacrificial rituals, and the line is something like, lottery in June, it'll be corn soon. So you can read that as tying into the lottery as being some kind of fertility ritual. But the other element of it is that going through the lottery, giving the winner, inverted commas, their special reward, again, inverted commas, maintains the community's social order, and maintains the system that they have in place, which Jackson never alludes to how this has grown up or anything like that, which I think is actually makes the story even more powerful, because your imagination has to do the work of why is their community grown up like this? What events could have happened to make them devise this ritual in the first place that every village maintains? And there's a line early on in the setup of the story where Jackson says other villages which are much bigger, they have to take a full 2 days to do the lottery, whereas because there's only 300 people in their village, they can do it in 2 hours. Okay, so a quick summary. This is a revelation story. The revelation is that the winner of the lottery will be sacrificed in the village ritual. And if you've read the story before and you knew what was coming, and I hope that you've not gone through this without having read the story, reread it again if you can. The revelation is beautifully set up. There are little lines in the story that not only detail the backstory but have much more weight when you understand what the revelation is, and it makes you reevaluate everything that you read. So it's a perfect example of a revelation story. Couple of further notes. As I was doing this, it's a Saturday morning now. I forget the date. I'm rubbish with dates, but whatever date the video is published, because I'm going to publish it today. Last night I started doing a long-form hero's journey analysis of the Hunger Games, and the lottery ceremony itself really reminded me of the reaping in the Hunger Games, and not just the reaping, but if you watch the first scene of first couple of scenes of the Hunger Games again, or just the reaping scene, all the children dress up, and the families are very accepting. They know one of their girls and one of their boys is going to be sacrificed in the Hunger Games as a tribute, and the similarities between the two I found were really striking. The communities themselves were very similar in many ways, in terms of the description of how Jackson describes the village, which is never given a name. So it might be one of those examples where when you read a story, in one of my other video articles, I talked about riffing on a story, where you read a story that you really enjoyed and you try and take 4 or 5 ideas. How could I make a story from this part of this story that I've just read? And maybe, and I don't know because I don't know much about the author of The Hunger Games, maybe she was influenced by this to come up with the idea of the reaping and how that leads into the later story of the Hunger Games. Because what you have then, so obviously Jackson's short story finishes with Tessie being stoned, although the last line of the story is something like, and then they were upon her. And so again, it's left to the imagination how the stoning goes. But maybe Suzanne Collins thought, well, that was really interesting. What would happen if you have some kind of lottery and you have to sacrifice a child, a boy and a girl between 14 and 18? What happens to those two people? Where do they go? Maybe that was an influence on the Hunger Games. I don't know, but I can't help seeing the parallels, and maybe I would have missed them if I was doing the hero's journey analysis of the Hunger Games, not at the same time as I was doing a short form hero's journey analysis on the lottery. And maybe I've picked up that echo. Maybe it's not even an echo. Maybe Suzanne Collins drew her influence from somewhere else. I don't know. But I thought it was worth mentioning. And with the lottery, you could also analyse this through the lens of sociological storytelling. Now, that's a whole new can of worms. I will try and remember to put a link in the video description underneath this video to an article on sociological storytelling, which is to do with Game of Thrones as well. Great article that I highly recommend you go and read. If you don't know the differences between psychological and sociological storytelling, this will be eye-opening for you, and may lead you on an adventure of your own, going off looking at sociological storytelling. So I'll try and remember to put that link in the description. But the lottery could be analysed through this lens because it's very much about the society sticking together. Everyone has defined roles, and then when Tessie draws the black dot, she then becomes an outsider, and the society deals with her. But you could use that in a different storytelling context as a story idea. Again, see what I mentioned about riffing on existing stories, by having a member of society be outcast by something, and then how they deal with that, and how they maybe try and change society, and try and upend the sociological order in the society. Very rich theme that could be mined if that's something that resonates for you. Anyway, I'll try and remember to put that link in. In the next episode, the next short form 5-step hero's journey analysis, minimum viable hero's analysis, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to analyse another of my favourite Ray Bradbury stories. This one's going to be The Foghorn. There's a paragraph of description which I am going to screenshot and put in and read out in that description. One of the best lines of description, or paragraphs of description, I've ever read. I remember, so one thing, I got an email about where I'm drawing all these stories from, and a lot of them were suggested by Stephen King's book Danse Macabre. It's how I got into Ray Bradbury, how I got into Shirley Jackson, how I got into Richard Matheson and Harlan Ellison. If you're interested at all in science fiction, fantasy, horror, dark fantasy, especially dark fantasy horror, I would read, but also there's elements that apply to science fiction and fantasy as well. I would pick this book up. It's a non-fiction book. it's a really interesting book, and King recommends several authors, and if you've not read them, you should definitely make the time to read them. All of his recommendations are pretty spot on as far as I was concerned. Very influential to me. I picked the book up, I think, in the early 80s, and I would have been around in my late teens then. Don't want to particularly carbon date myself, but hey ho, it is what it is. And I read a lot of King's recommendations, and they were very influential on me as a writer and a storyteller and thinking about story. May find it's the same for you, so definitely think about that. But a lot of the stories that I choose are based on the recommendations that Steve made in Danse Macabre. Okay, if you want to ask me any questions, use my email, paul@deliberate-practice.com, or you can comment on the video, but email's better. I will see it much quicker. And if you're a frustrated and or aspiring fiction writer, you might want to check out my resource. I call it The Vault, but it's technically writing-vault.com. It's a resource that you might find interesting. Some interesting bonus stuff being added in the next few weeks. So do check that out. And thank you for your time watching this, and I will catch you in the next video article.